A, meeting opening. A1, call to order. A2, adoption of the agenda. Are there any consent agenda items that a board member would like to have discussed as an action item? Okay, hearing none, do I have a motion to adopt the meeting agenda?
I move that we adopt the meeting agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Conchas. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Solorio. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, we're going to move to B, study session B1, affordable housing. You're on.
Good to go. Top-notch technology stuff. Good evening, everyone. This evening. My name is Denton Sanford. Not too- Spent my energy. This is one of those topics. Midsummer. They were study at but Darlene's background she recently retired from that. So they commissioned this study. And the gist of it, where housing put together school. And my role in that was context. Public education is critical. What really resonated with me, the state of Arizona and actually across the country, we're facing the greatest teacher shortage. Recent report indicate that school personnel association to determine vacancies. And the most recent one they did was January. Districts, and they surveyed over 200 districts in the state of Arizona. Districts were reporting up average 27. Size. In addition to that, many children that did not meet the full certification. A variety of things have contributed to that. Greatest teacher shortage. At the same time, look at the increase home median home value in Arizona right now, $450,000. Prices have gone up 29% in a year. That's good if you own a home. Yes, Mr. President. I would be honored to do such a thing. My glasses fog out, so now I can really even see you. So thank you very much. And I certainly appreciate the protocol. I understand that. But that said, Cost of housing is astronomical. Mere rent. Rent has gone up 15% just in the last year. And so as part of my role in this, Ms. Newsom asked me to give them some context to this report, which I was glad to do. But in addition to that, it aligned very much with my passion, and that's teaching and learning. And it occurred to me that if this was something that was going to be more than just a paper that you read and say, oh, that's a nice idea. They did it in LA, done it in Denver. I really needed to get it in front of school leaders to see if it makes sense. And so I assembled a team down in Tucson at the Arizona School Administrators Conference that took place in June. We were able, through Mark Jordanstead and ASA, to agenda with a breakout session. And having spent my entire career in education in the last decade as a superintendent, it was very important to me that if we're going to do this in a way that makes sense, it has to make financial sense and it has to make legal sense. And then we also have to put together the partnerships that make this work for our individual communities, because as you know, your community here in Alhambra is Alhambra. It's not Peoria. It's not Isaac. Every district has its own uniqueness, and that's the beauty of governance. But so we put this presentation together. I asked Chris Thomas, probably familiar with Chris Thomas, as an Assistant Executive Director of Arizona School Board Associations, and obviously he's their legal counsel. He's been in the business. I've known him for over 20 years. So I asked him to serve on the panel, asked him to provide his legal background and information and context. I also, in addition to Darlene with her expertise in housing, I also reached out to a local developer by the name of Matt Waltz. Matt was glad to donate his time, add that developer's perspective to this conversation. And so we did our presentation. There were probably 60 superintendent, assistant superintendents in that presentation. The response that we received was overwhelming, frankly, from all over the state. Rural, small rural districts to huge city districts reached out and asked us to do this kind of thing and provide support. And for me, it's more about helping districts because we're not housing experts. Some of you may be with your backgrounds as board members, I don't know, but I know from my perspective, typically don't have the depth of knowledge and understanding in that to bring something like this to fruition, which is very complicated, trying to simplify it, make it. So that was my entry point. Since then, we have been invited to speak to a lot of districts, and both in the side of the valley, and we're glad to do such a thing. The next venture in relationship to presentation was Arizona School Board Association, and maybe some of you saw our presentation at the School Board Association. Obviously, school leaders like yourselves are the ones that are going to be the decision makers on these kinds of things. And so we did another presentation, and there were over 100 in that session at the school law conference recently. And so that's been very exciting and so as we maneuver through this report, our primary role is to provide support and assistance. You have your own legal counsel, student, I've seen myself through the years, and I know that you also know the nuances associated with this. But the report is pretty specific. There's a legal attachment, and I don't know if that has been shared with all of you. Earlier, we did share that from Mr. Thomas. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Newsom, who will really walk you through some of the high points. This report is very extensive, and certainly we won't take your time to go through the entire report, but Darlene will give you a little bit of her background, her expertise, And then we'll circle back at the pleasure of the board with some process thoughts and answer any questions you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, good evening. Again, I'm Darlene Newsome. I'm retired from UMOM New Day Center. I was there for 20 years. I was in the nonprofit arena for 44 years of my life. I care a lot about this community. While I was at UMOM, I had the great experience of not only sheltering those who needed housing, temporary housing, but also got into affordable housing, because you really have to look at the full continuum when you're working with families who have been homeless, individuals and youth who've been homeless, is ending their homelessness. That's always the end goal. And you can't do that unless you really look at permanent housing. And so at UMOM, we developed, while I was there, around 600 units of affordable housing. And these were complexes that were from the ground up, anywhere from 60 to 90 units. And all the projects that we were involved with were, for the most part, LIHTC, low-income tax credit projects, that are funded through the Department of Housing in the state. It's a competitive process. It's 9% tax credit projects. And I think we got pretty good at that. You know, I was talking to some of the people that we worked with today, and they reminded me that, you know, when we finished our South 7th project down at Southern and 7th Street, it was 90 units for 55 and over with a preference for veterans. We had over 450 applicants for those 90 units. We, in fact, just opened up a complex on Bethany Home and 69th Avenue. And it's our first project in Glendale, and that was 72 units, 2 and 3 bedrooms, mostly for families. And we actually stopped accepting applications at the point where we had 350 applications. There's long waiting lists. We all know affordable housing. We've read it in the newspaper. We've seen it on TV. You know, our salaries have gone up around 15% and rents have gone up 45 to 50%. And so you can see how that gap gets wider and wider. And our goal here, when we talk about affordable housing, we actually call it attainable housing. And I actually stole that from California, because, you know, when you talk about affordable housing, sometimes people have this in their mind, all like not good housing. It's all Section 8 housing. And there's all kind of myths around affordable housing. And so attainable housing is really what we're talking about. And we know that especially our first and second year teachers, many of them are not only working one job, sometimes 2 or 3 jobs in order to make the ends meet. And so other states, what surprised me, and I was approached by Vitalist to help author this paper, legal intern, Asha, who was working at the foundation. I had just retired. And when Suzanne, the president of Vitalist, approached me on this, it kind of sparked an interest with me, because when we were building one of our complexes at Northern and 19th Avenue, it was called 19 West. And I normally, you know, get very involved. I live in that community. And we involve the community whenever we do any kind of building or opening of shelters or anything. It's a community effort. So I went to visit the principal, Colleen Mahoney, over at Orangewood Elementary School, because I knew there would be an influx of kids from that complex coming into the school. And I wanted to give her as much warning as possible. And she said to me, she said, you know, after you build it and you're ready to lease up, will you come here first? Because I have teachers who are living in their RV with their children. And I just sat there and I looked at her and I had no idea. You know, I had been in my little nonprofit world working with homeless families and individuals and youth. And I'm thinking, I never thought about that. And, you know, education was always key at UMOM. Education was a priority. It's a gateway to opportunity. We all know all of those things, or we wouldn't be sitting here today. And so when she asked if I would help on this paper, I was a learning experience for me too. I have experience with building affordable housing, working with individuals who are barely making ends meet, families who are struggling. And so I was very interested in getting involved. And now, as you can see, I'm very involved. And I was so happy that I had the opportunity to invite Dr. Denton Center, retired superintendent Peoria, to be part of this, because my background is not education. I don't, you know, I just kind of plow through and ask for forgiveness later. But I have to understand that we really have to step back and we have to work with each of these school districts, and there's rules and there's policies and there's guidelines, and that we need to educate ourselves on those. And if we identify what some of those barriers are, we can work through those. So there are other communities, and it's stated in the report, other communities that have actually done this. In California, in Eagle County in Colorado, they actually came up, the school district, 10-year housing plan, how they were going to approach this. And several months ago, they just broke ground on their first project, which was with Habitat for Humanity, which is about 12 townhomes that they're building. There's many different ways that we can look at attainable housing. It's just not construction. It's not building necessarily big complexes. It could be tiny homes like they did in Vail. Now, in some of our tribal communities, they've done housing subsidies for teachers for years. You know, they add that as part of the fringe benefit package to keep recruit and keep teachers on in the tribal community. And so, and there's also ways that one of the things that we did at UMOM is a rental subsidy program. And that's even been tried in some districts where they help or they build that into the base salary, some type of rental assistance for the first couple years, especially for those first and second year teachers. But we're not only talking about teachers here, we're also talking about your support staff. You know, the staff that keep the wheels turning at the schools, the janitorial staff, the cooks in the cafeteria, your front end clerical and administrative staff. We're talking about teachers and support staff at schools. And so when we had the opportunity to present to the superintendent's conference down in Tucson, it was, to me, it was like opening my eyes because there was so much interest there. And everyone was saying, yes, I agree with what you're saying. Yes, something needs to happen and something needs to be different. So this report actually highlights several of those areas, and it talks about teachers' salaries. It talks about how we compare with other states. We already know how we compare with other states, right? And we have some work to do there. I understand that you're doing a little bit better in this district. I've had some conversation with Kristen, and I think you guys do an excellent job. In fact, one of my best friends was working at the high school here, and I can't tell you how much she really enjoyed the district and impressive stuff that you're doing here. But I don't think I think all of you have a copy of this report. So what happened is actually after the report was published, I approached a foundation, the Diane and Bruce Holly Foundation. And I've had a long-term relationship with the foundation when I was at UMOM. And Diane Holly, that's the foundation that's part of Discount Tire. And I approached her about this concept. She read the report. She loved it. She loves education. Is one of her pillars in the family foundation. And so she funded like a pilot startup for us to kind of pay for consultants to come in, pay for whatever we might need to move this concept forward. And so that allows us to not only just publish a report, but actually over the next 6 to 8 months, actually try to implement and figure out how we can make this happen. We know there are some barriers, you know, we know there are some rules, there are some things that we have to work through. But to me, education is a priority. And wouldn't it be great for those who work within this district to be able to live where they work? And that makes such a big difference about creating community, is if people are able to actually live in the community in which they work and have their children go to school in that community. And, you know, I can't say how much it is my children, that we would go to the grocery store and we could see the teacher shopping at the grocery store and things like that, how exciting that is and how that really creates a sense of belonging, which makes a big difference in somebody's success. And that's what we're talking about here. This is really all about the children. And so the other area I wanted to cover is that while I was at UMOM, I'm really big on partnerships. I'm really big on shared agreements. I had like 46 different shared agreements and partnerships when I was at UMOM, because I realized what we did well, but our families needed so much more than what we did. I know what our genius was. So I would go out in that community and I would find out who did something really well, like Phoenix Children's Hospital medical care. So we got a medical clinic, after school programs, Boys and Girls Club, pulled them on campus to do work. You know, St. Joseph's the Worker, they did great work in employment. So I think there's opportunity here as we look at attainable housing to also look at other services and other shared agreements that fit the district. I think each district is going to look a little bit different when they look at attainable housing. We could locate a healthcare clinic, a federally qualified healthcare clinic on the base floor. We could offer, you know, childcare for younger children for your staff. There's workforce. There's all kinds of different ways that we can develop those partnerships to not only make it attainable housing for teachers and the support staff, but also a resource for your community in which you live. And I understand there's some synergy around arts. You know, I think arts are very important, and maybe even rolling some of that into what we're looking at here as we build this community. So I'm very excited about all the different possibilities and partnerships and ways that we can accomplish this, make this happen. I think it's something that is needed, obviously. I think that, you know, Dr. Santarelli already mentioned that many of the teachers, there's a teacher shortage. We have to think of different ways that we can recruit and retain our teachers and make this more of a community in the district. And I think that this attainable housing concept is one way that we look at that and really make it a tool that will not only recruit and retain teachers, but obviously affect the education that we're providing. And so at this point, I think I'll turn it over to Christian and he can take it from here, and then we can have some time for questions.
Thank you, Darlene. As if you couldn't tell already, I was the one that was pushing in the background to get this study session set up, and this is actually our second meeting. We had a previous meeting, district leadership, Dr. Maez, and as well with our legal counsel. So we did some groundwork before bringing it here where us as a group can discuss openly, because I was very excited about the outcome of the meeting and wanted to share it with y'all, to tell y'all why it makes so much sense for Alhambra to be involved in something like this. So there's a few reasons, and one, I feel like I bridged the gap between affordable housing and education, my experience as a board member and my professional work in affordable housing. So I was very comfortable, you know, and understanding on both sides legally what we had to overcome, and then financially what was the district committing. And what's really nice about this initiative is that in the partnerships, all of the effort, it's really getting shifted over to the partners. because school districts are not developers. They're not in the business of building housing. They're in the business of educating our children. And that should, and, and I wholeheartedly believe, be their primary focus. And that's why this opportunity is so beneficial to us, because it's really, we're a partner and a conduit for their work. And we are a beneficiary of their work. And as Darlene was mentioning, the benefits can be just beyond housing. It can be so much more. And again, I get really excited by this. As what does it mean for, as she mentioned, a healthcare clinic, a daycare center, all of these things that can be financed and done outside of our school's effort. So we can maintain our focus where we want it, and we receive the benefit from this. So another reason that it makes sense for us is we have a few acres of land sitting a few hundred yards from us that have been empty since I was a student here in the early 2000s. And it will continue to be vacant because our school district is not growing and have no needs for any new campuses. So I was always thinking about what's something we can do to bring a community on this parcel of land that for the foreseeable future will remain an empty parcel of dirt. And while we have this beautiful 1930s historic building, one of the few historic buildings we have in our community, just kind of sitting there, what can we do to activate it? What can we do? So what's the desired outcome from this meeting and this session? So as Darlene mentioned, there's funding from the Halle Foundation. And this funding is to fund the pilot project, which is to do the work, the groundwork, and having it paid for, and having it be outside of the district's court. So it's not any additional burden to our school district or administration. And it would just need to align with our vision as a school district, as Dr. Maez and her leadership and her voice and her vision on what support our district needs on the housing side, because it can serve many populations, not just our teachers, our support staff, our families, our homeless families. The list goes on who exactly can it serve. And that all that flexibility can't, or all of those decisions can't happen unless we have those tools to put in the groundwork. And when a foundation shows up with a checkbook and says, hey, we'll pay for all of that, I think it's hard to say no. So that's leading me to the next point, which is, let's say we are identified as one of these districts that should enter this pilot program. So what does that look like? And what are the legal barriers that we're going to need to overcome? And what's the advice that we received from Susan, our counsel? So I'll dive into that a little bit, which starting with the legal advice. So as you know, there's, or may or may not be familiar, there's a gift clause in the state of Arizona, which prevents any government entity from gifting anything to anybody else. So we can't simply give away the property that we have and say, hey, XYZ entity, please build some housing for our teachers. That's not how it would work. We would need to overcome that gift clause. And unfortunately, we're not a rural school district where if we were, we would automatically by right have authority to develop housing for teachers as part of bridge benefits that Darlene had mentioned. But we're not in that situation. And even though I think next legislative session, we're going to lobby to include urban districts so that that tool is available. But in the meantime, it's not. So that being the case, our legal counsel advised us, and in her opinion, and again, because this has been, as y'all know, like in law regarding schools and all of that, it's interpreted many different ways. And I wanted, again, to lean on our legal counsel because I think she's a trusted voice for our district. And her advice and her suggestion and recommendation was for us to pursue this initiative via an election. So we would have to put up a lease or a long-term lease as part of the or sale, but I think a long-term lease makes a lot more sense. But that's just my 2 cents. Um, a long-term lease that we could engage with the partnerships, and that would be elected on. And of course, it doesn't make sense for us to run an entire election just for this. So it would really, from a timing standpoint, piggyback off of an override election or a bond election. But what does that mean for timing? That means we have a lot of time to really think through, find partners, and really create that vision. So when the time comes to have that this project hit the ballot, all the groundwork has been laid, and we can build that enthusiasm alongside our override or bond campaign, whichever one we get backing on. So we're here to kind of answer any questions. I'm here to kind of walk you through why I think it makes sense. And I think for y'all who've known the work that I do here and for the district is I'm always seeking ways that I can bridge silos to benefit our students, to benefit our community. And this opportunity came up, and I can't just let it die because it's just such a tremendous opportunity. The work I do in affordable housing is so impactful. I've seen the way that housing projects have transformed entire communities. Darlene mentioned an arts project that I worked on in Mesa. And it's a really beautiful project. And what happened at this project is once it got built, it was affordable housing for artists. Who ended up benefiting were not just the residents who got to live there, but the entire community. It became a hub for art. The nonprofit Aliento hosts so many art events there. There's open mic nights. There's gallery nights. There's craft nights. There's all of these things. But again, the entire community needs to use this resource, and they benefit from it. And I remember growing up here in this neighborhood and not having that exposure to art, and not until I was much older, and now I love it, and I'm like, I can't believe without it and being exposed to it. And again, art is just one example, but these projects become such a conduit for change, for redevelopment, reinvestment in our communities, that I just can't see us passing up on an opportunity like this to support our students, to support our teachers, to support our staff, to support our community. And again, with a very minimal effort from our school district, so they can maintain their sites on where it matters, but we can still reap the benefits. So I think we will open it up for questions from the board. Sorry. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. Yeah, I'm off my soapbox.
The idea here, poly-nation, is to really select 4 or 5, 6 school districts that carry with a housing developer, and then figure out some of the finance. And so that's the whole idea, is to do that partnership with the school district. And one of the reasons why this, has an affordable housing developer, I always looked for land in more central Phoenix to build, knowing that there's a big workforce that keeps the city going and the communities going. But we can't, it's very difficult to afford that land. And so one of the things the school district has is land. And so this partnership just makes sense that we do that, because there's very little ways that we're going to be able to purchase land. And so we have to look at what the availability of, and school districts have schools they possibly land that they've land banked with the hope of building, or schools that, you know, like I said, have closed and they need your purpose, or a soccer field or whatever. Because it's important that we have that affordable housing structure, especially in this whole central area of Phoenix. And we had an opportunity to have discussion with me, and she's very supportive. Her pillars of interest are education, affordable housing, children, and really the quality of life. So I think that that's important, and we're working on some financing, what that looks like, whether it's low-income tax credits, 4%, general bonds, private financing. These are some of the things that we can help once those groups are identified who want to go to the next step and want to move forward. And so right now, we probably have quite a few, 11 or so districts that are really talking about this and wanting to move forward, because they see what a critical need is and how that will impact schools. And so I just hope that that clarifies just I was presenting and Kristen and Doctor's interest.
And a quick introduction to the gentleman in the back, Gabriel Jaramillo. He's with Vitalist Community Foundation, who again was instrumental in putting together this paper, and just wanted to do a quick introduction to him.
Any questions from the board?
So I know we're very early, obviously, in these. Practically, what is the commitment that the school district has to put forward in order to get something like this done?
From my understanding, it would be in entering an MOU agreement to push this forward to find partners. And then from that point, it would also be the campaign for the election, for the decision making, if that's the route we end up going, which according to our legal counsel, that's a recommended route to go as current law stands, but that may change. So did that answer your question?
Is it, so the election would be a bond override?
It would be its own item,
Oh, with something.
and then we would do it along with, because those elections are very expensive, and to do an election for something this on a district-wide scale, it's not very big. It's probably not worth the effort. So we would piggyback on an election that we're going to do anyways.
I see. So the election would just be a practical decision. It's not, besides the cost of the election, there's no financial obligation as a part of the.
Correct. At the moment, although that with partnerships could change, but there are many financial tools and mechanisms that can make it so that the school district, other than the land, is not committing anything else. And I'm saying that broadly, but
Right.
there's many ways to structure a deal to make sure that if that's what the district wants, that's what we can get to.
Okay. I think, just my personal opinion is that I think this is a great idea. I've always thought that it's driving down Grand is a bit of an eyesore, but I never thought the opportunity to develop the potential to develop live here. And so I'm very curious about zone. I know it's very difficult because there's weird zoning rules, but I assume we don't develop it as we like. Is that the way it is? Okay. Okay, yeah, if we have an opportunity, I think it would be great, because it's very difficult for other people to come and develop on Grand because of zoning. So yeah, if we have the opportunity, that would be fantastic.
Mr. Solera, just a quick question. We probably would be in 2024, 2026 in terms of our election schedule. If it is until 2026, would we be able to like put that into the MOU and like kind of work towards that if it's so far away? That's my question.
That's a great question that I cannot answer. And Darlene, maybe you can do some research with the Halle Foundation on the timing. So 2024 is our earliest election, but it could be until 2026.
I think that every district's going to, I think it has to be comfort level with the superintendent and the board on what they feel comfortable with, in moving forward. I mean, this isn't something that can happen overnight, and there are some barriers. My enthusiasm comes, there's communities that have accomplished this, something that's been done. So we're continuing to actually have conversations with some of these kids so we can help our community. If there's something that they've already done and they were successful, is that something that we can do? So we understand, I think the time frame is going to be different for everyone. We know there is a crisis now, with recruitment and retention. But projects like this don't happen necessarily overnight. Even as a developer, and we would identify property, and sometimes it would develop it for several years after that. But the nice thing about the schools is that a lot of the local zoning doesn't to the land, but yet you want to be real sensitive about the community, that land, and make sure that you have time to education.
Hans, too, just a follow-up comment. Questions and conversations, excellent point. Certainly getting legal advice and putting on my superintendent hat, getting legal advice is top of the order. And as I understand it, Member Solorio, the ballot initiative would be basically allowing the district to go out for a 20-year lease, if that's how I understand it. So that would be what I think the question here that was asked was, there more that initiative would be just getting voter approval to enter into a 20-year lease for the buildings and the land. I understand that. And then the other comment I'd like to make is, as you down this path, how you proceed is entirely up to you. Whatever partnerships that come about as a result of that are exciting and important. Just remember that those kinds of things do not absolve you as a board from procurement process and guidelines. So just keep that in the back of your mind, because there's a lot of excitement, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of people that are going to jump in and help support all of this, are bound by those procurement guidelines that your superintendent leadership team can certainly advise you upon. So those were just a couple of caveat points that I wanted to share with you, that you're very aware of as board members. But this is a unique and new application for a lot of that. And one of the that Member Solorio talked about as far as this legislative change and those kinds of things, we've got a lot of the alphabet groups trying to enact some of these changes, one of which may be to try to extend the 20-year lease restriction. Because by having a 20-year lease restriction, that rules out some other opportunities potentially that are available, because we're bound to a 20 year. So that's a good one. Changing the language so that it is not just specific to rural, urban districts and that sort of thing. So there's a pathway. and there's a lot of excitement and people that trust to help you with decisions.
And I would just like to say, I think we have a really great opportunity that we have a board member that is very passionate about this. And I just want to thank Mr. Solorio for bringing this to the board. A little bit of a personal story. I went to 5 elementary schools as a kid, and 2 middle schools and 1 high school. And the reason, and I probably moved around two or three times when I was in high school, but the high school covered the entire town of Prescott Valley. And for me, understanding what it's like to be homeless, understanding what it's like to not be able to afford the rent, understanding the impacts that it had on my education. I think that the fact that we're focusing on this and really living our mission of educating the whole child, it's initiatives like this, it's thinking outside of the box, it's thinking about bringing in collaborative partners where we can really solve issues for our families. And so thank you, Mr. Solorio, once again for bringing this. And thank you to you all for coming and presenting this to our board. I also really enjoyed the report, especially looking at other options such as home buyers education, preferred lender relationships, things like that. So I look forward to some of the ideas and some of the things that we come up with in the long term, but also looking at some of the things we may be able to do in the short term. I appreciate it, and I'm done speaking.
Thank you. So I'm assuming that with the gym in place on the land, that part of this process would include refurbishing property that's already on land?
I can, it's again, it would be up to the partnership that we would end up making on what's the fate of the gym. Would the gym serve as a health center? Would the gym serve as an art gallery for our district? Would the gym just be converted into housing? That's all in the cards. I would hate to see it demolished. I would, yeah, but
Thank you, yeah, President Francis, members, and those are the kinds of things that you would include in the procurement process when you go through, so that it's very clear as to what it is that you're looking to want. Certainly in control of all of that.
Thank you. I think this is a great opportunity for the district, and I too want to thank you, Mr. Solorio, for bringing this to us. Of course, I always think of the bottom dollar, and my concern is when I hear you talk about the 20 years, what happens after 20 years, because, you know, I'm hoping to still be alive in 20 years. And if I am, I'm really disappointed if I drive by there and it doesn't look any good anymore. So I would be concerned about the 20 years and the sustainability and making sure that our district does not have to have any out-of-pocket cost. But I think this is an excellent opportunity, and I'm really excited to move forward. Thank you so much for your presentation, and thank you, Mr. Solorio, for all your information and bringing this to the board. Any other questions from anybody? Thank you. Thank you. All right, we're going to go ahead and take an 11-minute break.
say
C, reconvene. C1, Pledge of the Allegiance. Right, move to D, presentation. D1, Trees Matter. Paulina Vu.
All right, awesome. Wow, thank you. Hello, my name is Paulina Vu. I'm speaking on behalf of Trees Matter today, and it's so nice to be back here. I was here at a board meeting years ago. It's so lovely to see all of you. Pleasure of planting trees in 2 of your schools already, and I'm here to present on an exciting project we'll have here coming up with our maintenance and facilities folks. And I see some familiar faces here, so hello. Nice to see all of you. Awesome. For today, I'm going to be short and sweet. I'm just going to go over our past collaboration, and then I will be talking about our maintenance and custodial tree care class. And then I will also open up for any questions. So it'll be really brief here. Oh, sorry. All right, so we planted at Cordova Elementary, and we planted 13 trees. You can see which ones we've planted here. And then here you can see a map of where they went. From what I remember, I believe it was in between the 5th and 6th grade classrooms, and then a few out there. So yeah, we had a great time planting with the kids. It's been a while since we've been able to do that. And we've also planted at Choice Learning Academy all the way back when it was still known as Simpson. And we planted 12 trees there for Chinese elm and 8. And again, you can see where we planted them there as well. So for the class that I'm presenting to you today, it came actually out of a conversation I had with a maintenance staff when I was going to measure the trees. If you didn't know, our promise to the schools that we plant at is so that we plant the trees, but we don't run away. We aren't here to leave you with a bunch of bills and maintenance to do by yourself. And so I actually go back to the schools and measure trees every 6 months and make sure the maintenance is okay. But in one of my conversations with the staff, he told me that, you know, I'd love to take care of these trees. I would love to have them at our schools, but a lot of times they become more of a liability than they are an asset. And that's because I just don't know how to take care of them. And it's, you know, I have so many things I have to do. I've got to juggle so many things. So I'd really love to learn, but I don't know how. And wow, what a powerful sentiment. And because of that statement, I did some talking to our staff, and we recognized that maintenance is often the, I suppose, unsexy side of tree care. A lot of people like to plant, a lot of people like to be underneath the trees, but a lot of times we don't remember the hard work that has to go into maintaining and caring. And so because of that, we've decided and applied for a grant and got the grant with the Arizona Department of Fire and Forest Management, and found a community challenge grant to put on this class that is free of charge for all maintenance staff. And that's at the district level and any of the schools in your district, even if you have planted with us or not. Any of the schools are welcome to send their custodial staff and their maintenance groundskeepers as well to come learn with us. And here's the information for the class. It will be, it's not on here, but I'll definitely send out the definite details. It'll be October 29th, that's a Friday, and there'll be 2 classes, one at 10 a.m. and that will be in English, and the other at 12 p.m. noon, that will be in Spanish, because we do recognize that a lot of our custodial staff are predominantly Spanish speaking and want to make sure we cover everyone's needs. So our topics will include identifying disease and pests, being able to identify common tree problems at the schools, the benefits of trees, and then young tree pruning. So the class will compose of two parts. One being the presentation components, and the other being where we'll be outside and doing some hands-on pruning and planting and whatever else the instructors think is a good experience for our folks. So there's a registration link that will also be sent out via email. It's already up and live, and you can register for either the English or the Spanish. I would recommend that you please do that. You can still come if you don't register, but we'd like to have our numbers just so that we know how many tools to order, and we'll also be ordering food. So just so we know the numbers of how many people we need to order for. Yeah, and it will be hosted at Desert Sands Middle School. Apologies, and the address is up there as well. At this moment, I believe that's it. And questions?
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. A question that I have is in terms of trees, what are some of the common issues or common problems in terms of the maintenance of trees?
Yeah, so there's often issues with structural pruning. So say, plant the tree rather young. When the tree's young, the branches are very, so there can be some problems that you can prevent later on. So as people always say, prevention is better than dealing with it later, the larger symptoms later on. So for instance, if a tree has crossed branches, and that can be a huge problem, then teaching the maintenance staff how to prune those trees young when they're easier to do. It's just a little snip as opposed to a huge chainsaw or something. That's one of the common ones you see where there's some problems where the branches may have been too low, so kids might run into them when they're going around the fields. And some of them are, maybe the trees when they were planted, this is trees that are older, maybe they're planted a little too deep, so there's some trunk rot because, imagine if you are putting your hand into water for a long time, that's what happens if they're planted too deep. And if that's the case, they'll die and have some structural problems later on. So, yes, this class is more to kind of help the maintenance staff recognize these problems early on, which will reduce costs and reduce risk.
And then my other question is, thank you so much for measuring our trees. And when was the last time that the trees that we worked together with in terms of the district were measured, and is there any status on the health of them?
Sure. They were measured last spring, I believe. It's been a while. We're still trying to get together. Currently, all the measurements are done by myself, intern, or any volunteer that we can get. So we're trying to get out there to all of our schools. Currently, we're in 20 schools, and it takes a while to get out into the field. So it was last spring. They're doing quite well, especially the ones that are desert adapted. So I think the mesquites are at Simpson, I believe, are very, very tall. I think those are some of the tallest ones we've had. And your schools are kind of near dear heart because those are the first plantings I did as in this position. So yeah, so I love to see how they're doing. And, but yeah, they're doing quite well. I think we've lost a few, unfortunately. I'd love to get to a point where I have people to help me out in terms of replacing trees. We'd love to do that in the future. And we have ways to do that in case we need to train volunteers of how to. So there's ways. I'm always thinking about our schools. So yes, but I think in general they're doing quite well. I have all the information. So if you ever are curious to see how they're doing, all of those things, and you can just shoot me an email. I'm happy to send it to you via Excel or anything like that.
Thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, move to E, public comment, and we have no public comment this evening. F, consent agenda. F1, approval of consent agenda items. I call for motion that the governing board approves consent agenda items F1 through F6. Do I have a motion?
I move that we approve consent agenda items F1 through F6.
Thank you, Mr. Solorio. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Conchas. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Move to G, Board Policies. G1, second reading of policies BDF, Advisory Committees, BEDD, Rules or Order, BEDG, Minutes, BEDH, Public Participation at Board Meetings. Do I have a motion that the Governing Board approve the second reading of policies BDF, BEDD, BEDG, and BEDH?
I move that we approve for the reading of policy BDF, policy BEDD, policy BEDG, and policy BEDH.
Thank you, Mr. Oropeza. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Solorio. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
G2, first reading of policy DIE, audits, financial monitoring. Do I have a motion that the Governing Board approve the first reading of policy DIE, audits, financial monitoring?
I move that the governing board approve the first reading of policy DIE.
Thank you, Mr. Concha. Do I have a second?
A second.
Thank you, Mr. Oropeza. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
G3, first reading of policy DJ, purchasing. Do I have a motion that the Governing Board approve the first reading of policy DJ, purchasing?
I move that we approve the first reading of policy A, purchasing.
Thank you, Mr. Solorio. Do I have a second?
A second.
Thank you, Mr. Oropeza. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. H, new business, continuation of Families First Coronavirus Response Act, FFCRA. And qualifying reasons for the leave related to COVID-19. Do I have a motion that the Governing Board approve the continuation of Families First Coronavirus Response Act, FFCRA?
I move that the governing board approve the proposed continuation of the Families First Response Act FFA as submitted and the qualifying reasons for leave related to COVID-19.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Solorio. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
H2, financial year 2021, annual financial report and override bond update. Do I have a motion that the Governing Board approve the AE? I'm sorry, I thought you were coming for I. Sorry, go ahead. You have a lot on here, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, as well.
I didn't look up and see you standing there. You should have like cleared your throat really loudly.
Okay, let's start over. All right.
Thank you.
President O'Neill, France, members of the board, Dr. Myers. The annual financial report is, or AFR, is a historical document detailing the actual revenues and expenditures of the district from the prior fiscal year. The district is required to have the board approve and certify the annual financial report, and it must be submitted to ADE electronically. The format of the AFR is relatively the same as in the past several years, but please allow me to walk you through the pages that were included in your packet. The first page is the cover page, and it requires your signatures, signifying that you certified the document at this meeting. Cover page is followed by pages 1 through 9. These pages are an accounting of the various funds held by the school district. Following page 9 is the summary page. It requires the president's signature and will be published on the district and ADE websites. Next is the supplement to the AFR. However, we do not use any of the funds included on that page. After the supplement are the food service program and the classroom site fund narrative results relating specifically, obviously, to food service and the classroom site fund. These pages include descriptive information as well as more detail regarding those funds. Last is the school level reporting, which lists amounts of various expenditures by school for use by the Department of Education on school report cards. Also included in your packet is a single page reporting on the use and budget of amounts of our override funds and bond fund. Obviously, there's an abundance of information in this report and update, and subject to your questions, this concludes my comments on the annual report, overrides, and bond.
Madam President, just a question for Scott. In terms of the largest line item on the fiscal year 2021-22 bond budget, is future improvements to 21st century learning centers or other improvements at Westwood, Granada West, and Sevilla West for a total amount of $7,500,000. Could you just briefly explain a little bit about those projects?
Absolutely. So these are monies just set aside as budgeted amounts. We're planning to meet with schools, the teachers, the staff at these schools in the upcoming months. And these are the 3 schools across the district that have not had any gymnasium. They haven't had any renovations really from the bond. So one of the things that when we passed the bond in 2017, one of the things that we talked about and the board was aware of and also voted on was that we might renovate 21st century media centers or their libraries and kind of turn them into a 21st century media center. So that is one idea up for consideration, but obviously we want to involve the schools, the principal, the staff, get everybody's input into how those monies will be spent. But it's just at this point a budgeted amount to kind of hold those funds and noting that we're planning to spend them at the schools that really.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Are you going to stay for I? Do you want to stay for I?
I don't have any.
Okay.
If you have any questions on I will be right back up here.
Okay,
Absolutely.
thank you. Do I have a motion that the governing board approve AESD annual financial report for the 2021 school year?
I move that the governing board approve the Alhambra School District annual financial report for the 2020-2021 school year.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Solorio. A roll call.
Ms. O'Neill Franz,
Aye.
Mr. Solorio,
Aye.
Mr. Oropesa,
Aye.
Mr. Conchas.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Move to I, information items. I1, financial report. Does anybody want Scott up? I know you guys have questions for him. All right, we'll let him sit this time. I2, 5-year strategic planning timeline.
President O'Neill Franz, governing board members, and Dr. Maya. We in Alhambra leadership team recognize the value that our emphasis on strategic planning. We know that a 5-year strategic plan provides us a sense of direction and outlines the path to that direction with measurable goals. Our current 5-year strategic plan has expired. The timeline attached to tonight's agenda outlines our plan to establish Alhambra's next 5-year strategic plan. You will notice that multiple and varied stakeholders will be access to input thoughts towards the creation of that plan. Multiple and varied forms of data will also be evaluated and looked at to make sure that we have addressed every need to look at. So all of those things will inform our work. What's important about this moment is that we have the timeline in front of us. Our goal is that our plan accurately reflects our current reality and the necessary steps that we need to put in place so that we grow forward in the right direction. We also have a vision to craft a tool that is used and revisited often, representative of all facets of Alhambra, because we know and value every single stakeholder's input towards achieving the goals. So the purpose of this moment is just to make sure that you are aware that we do timeline and subject to any of your questions. That's all I have for you.
Thank you. Move to okay. Move to J, comments and communication. J1, comments from governing board members.
Madam President, I saw in our consent agenda and personnel actions that we have more than 36 new hires in today's report. So I just want to say welcome to all of those folks, and just great job to everyone on the Alhambra team who's been working really hard to bring on new folks and hopefully they stay for a very long time. Thank you.
Okay, move to J2, Governing Board Direction and/or Agenda Item Request. Well, I do have one question. So I was looking through the schools that were getting the electronic signs, which I'm thrilled about. But I noticed the district didn't have a sign. So I was wondering why the district didn't get a sign. I know we're down a residential street, but I also know that that street gets pretty busy. So just curious about that and if we could afford to get one at the district since you are the central hub of all of us. Moving to J3, comments from superintendent and executive team.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to thank everyone for all their hard work. I know we're just getting back from a fall break, and so I hope everyone took time to unwind and enjoy their loved ones and really just disconnect. At this time, I know that just speaking to teachers this morning, they're excited for conferences coming up next week, and so I want to thank everyone for their efforts to ensure that we reach all of our families. I know how important communication is. Our board president mentioned the marquees, and part of that is just our efforts. We want to make sure that we're communicating well with our families, and I know our families pass by our schools every day, and it's exciting to know that soon there will be consistent, current information available to them through that. And so again, I just want to commend everyone for their efforts to have successful conferences this next week, and thank you all, and hope you have a great evening.
It just reminded me of the safety of having electronic versus having somebody get up there on the ladder. Okay, K, meeting closed. K1, next governing board meeting is October 21st, 2021. K2, adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Solorio. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Conchas. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.